front lines of law, leadership, and public service. From the courtroom to the classroom, Attorney Jimeno brings sharp legal insight, academic excellence, and a voice that has guided national conversations. Attorney Mike Toledo, a seasoned public affairs strategist and legal mind with years in media, corporate leadership, and government reform. Together, they bring law to life with experience, integrity, and the courage to ask hard questions. Two minds shaped by the law. Two voices trusted in and out of the courtroom. This is ABOGADO.
Good evening and welcome to ABOGADO, where legal minds clash and national issues come alive. I'm Attorney Mike Toledo.
And I'm Attorney Jimeno. Tonight's discussion brings us to a deeply personal but profoundly legal issue, one that strikes at the heart of family, fidelity, and the justice system.
Some laws are clear, others invite debate, but a few lie at the intersection of morality, privacy, and justice. Tonight, we take a closer look at the laws that continue to shape how we understand commitment, demand accountability, and define personal boundaries. Here's our proposition.
Once, it was seen as betrayal, deserving not just heartbreak, but jail time. In the Philippines, adultery and kibinage remain criminal offenses, punishable under the law. Supporters say these penalties uphold the sanctity of marriage and deter moral collapse. But others argue, should love gone wrong be a matter for criminal court in a world where relationships are increasingly private, complex, and evolving? Should the justice system still police the bedroom? As we examine the law, its fairness, and its future, we ask, should marital infidelity be decriminalized in the Philippines?
Representing the side in favor of decriminalization is Attorney Norbe Jr. from the Nicolas and the Vega law offices, a distinguished graduate of the University of San Carlos and summa cum laude valedictorian from Mindanao State University. Attorney Norbe brings to the table a reputation for sharp legal reasoning and persuasive advocacy. As the representative of NDV law tonight, he draws on his civil litigation expertise and deep understanding of evolving legal norms to argue why criminal penalties for infidelity may no longer serve the interests of justice.
Now, arguing against decriminalization is Attorney Christopher John Lau of the Guzman, Dionido, Caga, Jucaban, and Associates Law Office, a summa cum laude graduate from UP Diliban, the top-ranked LLM graduate of Tsinghua University in Beijing, and a respected law professor at UP and DLSU. Attorney Lau brings both depth and discipline to tonight's debate. As the representative of the Guzman, Dionido, Caga, Jucaban, and Associates, he presents a firm and principled stance on why criminal penalties for marital infidelity must remain in place.
Before we begin the exchange of ideas, let's walk you through how tonight's discussion will unfold.
We begin with the opening statements. First, the speaker supporting the proposition presents their position in a focused 2-minute statement. Then, the speaker challenging the proposition offers their perspective, also within 2 minutes. The conversation then unfolds through 2 key subtopics. For each subtopic, the guest supporting the proposition presents their insights for 2 minutes, followed by a 2-minute perspective from the guest challenging the proposition. After both perspectives have been presented, we move into the open exchange, a 6-minute free-flowing discussion where both guests ask questions, share points, and respond to each other directly. Once both subtopics have been explored, we proceed to closing reflections where each guest is given 2 minutes to summarize their key messages. And finally, the hosts step in with their own questions. In this 6-minute segment, the guests respond, clarify, and deepen the discussion, ensuring no critical point is left unexplored.
Now we begin with our opening statements. The question, should laws punishing marital infidelity be decriminalized in the Philippines? Attorney Norbe, you have 2 minutes.
In the Philippines, marital infidelity is currently punished as adultery and concubinage under Articles 333 and 334 of the Revised Penal Code. This should be decriminalized for 3 reasons. First, criminalizing marital infidelity violates the Equal Protection Clause because it perpetuates gender inequality and bias, where women are at a disadvantage compared to men. Second, criminalizing marital infidelity violates the right to privacy and autonomy of 2 consenting adults. And third, criminalizing marital infidelity is not commensurate to the nature of the act. Marital infidelity is a violation of the contract of marriage, and therefore, the corresponding penalties should also be civil in nature. A policy brief prepared by the Philippine Commission on Women for the 17th and 18th Congress reveals that all European nations, most Latin American countries, the countries of Canada, South Korea, and Japan, among others, have already repealed their adultery laws. In the Asia-Pacific region, only the Brunei and the Philippines remain as the countries that treat adultery as a crime. That's why during the 17th and 18th Congress, 2 House bills were passed in order to decriminalize adultery and concubinage by repealing Articles 333 and 334 of the Revised Penal Code. Against this backdrop, it is high time that marital infidelity be decriminalized in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Attorney Norbe. Now I know why he's a valedictorian. Did you
Me
see
too.
that? Yeah.
Oh, by the way,
When-
yeah, that guy, you mentioned that partner because both of them have excellent
Yeah,
academic
very
credentials.
excellent
Yeah.
academic credentials. So now, Attorney Lau, so no pressure, but your opening statement, 2 minutes.
Oh, 2 minutes. Oh, thank you for that, Attorney Norbin. I learned so much. And well, you mentioned the inequality between adultery and concubinage. I think maybe reform is needed, not really to decriminalize because that's different. But for me, I would like to know the reason for the status quo. The status quo has a reason. Of course, it's about laws. The status quo, the legal status quo has a reason, and we presume the lawmakers to have known. To have known the reason for these laws. So the status quo is there. Well, I want to know, as you said, why we're following the other countries. We're a different country with our own idiosyncrasies, so we are not. So we have our own goals to achieve. The status quo, I want to know why it's not working. That's definitely something I want to know from you. Under the Constitution, marriage is inviolable, and I think we put a premium on marriage, and therefore it warrants the full attention of the state. So the state we ask ourselves, how important is marriage? If it's so important that maybe it warrants marshalling all the legal techniques, because law is a bundle of legal techniques, civil, criminal, administrative, and we know as lawyers that penal law is really the most effective one, in terms of deterring aberrant behavior. And maybe we can agree that infidelity is a moral depravity, and that it is a scourge because we don't want families to be spread too thin in terms of the resources. We don't want introducing venereal diseases into the matrimonial bed, among many things. And of course, it's more than a contract, as you said. If we liken it to just civil liability, we liken it to an ordinary contract. It's a special contract. Therefore, we have a social good, which is to reinforce the family. How do we do that? We marshal all the legal techniques, and so this is a social good reinforcement of the family. I think we need to support it, and the science says that it is not going to survive without criminal law.
Okay, time is up, Attorney Lau, but thank you so much for your opening statement. It's one thing to have laws, but are they fair to everyone? Let's talk about legal consistency, gender fairness, and the place of criminal law in intimate relationships. Attorney Norbe, let's begin with you.
Criminalizing marital infidelity violates the Equal Protection Clause because it perpetuates gender bias and inequality, where women are at a disadvantage compared to men. On the first level, there is an apparent inequality between the crimes of adultery and concubinage. A perusal of the Revised Penal Code, specifically Articles 333 and 334, reveals that adultery has easier elements to prove but heavier punishment. Contrast this with concubinage under Article 334, where the elements are harder to prove but the penalty is lighter compared to adultery. So in adultery, for example, what you need to prove is that the woman had sexual intercourse with another who is not her husband. In concubinage, for instance, this will not do because you have to prove that the sexual intercourse was committed under scandalous circumstances. Then that is just one act under concubinage. The other act is keeping a mistress in the conjugal abode, and third is cohabiting with the mistress in any other place. So, despite that, the penalty for adultery is heavier. Imprisonment of prison correctional in its medium and maximum period, as opposed to prison correctional in its minimum and medium periods for concubinage. And the justification for this apparent disparity is that, accordingly, the adulterer might introduce spurious heirs into the family. Well, this might be true a century or decade ago, but when the revised penal code was crafted in 1932, but now, with the technological advancements such as DNA testing, this no longer holds true. So the justification for this apparent disparity between the penalties for adultery and concubinage is no longer true. So on the second level, this violates our international commitments to international obligations such as the CEDAW, which found its way in the Magna Carta for Women, which mandate the repeal of adultery and concubinage. Because we are still criminalizing this, we are not upholding our obligations to international law.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Attorney Norbe, for that very strong argument. I guess, Attorney Lau, your response and perspective on the legal consistency, gender fairness, and the role of criminal law in such a deeply personal topic.
Yes. When we say that it's not, adultery and concubinage are not really, on equal footing, maybe do you want that it's the adultery be fair? Like maybe it calls for an amendment rather than a decriminalization, because decriminalization means that we no longer make it criminal. So that's my question to Attorney Norbe. So do you want it to be like concubinage, so that it's also difficult to prove on the part of the husband who goes after the wife? So it's yes, it doesn't really argue against. It doesn't really argue for decriminalization, no? But just to make the status quo fairer, but that it remains criminal in nature. That's one. And then about the international convention, I would like to be enlightened on it. Really, I don't know much about it, but the way I see it is that I'm not aware of it. But we are, again, a different country, so we are only, yes, the Constitution ranks higher than that. And then I'm not so sure that there's international law saying that you cannot criminalize this. It's a policy question and subject only to the Constitution. And I know that we're part of the community of nations, and I'm not sure that we are signatory to something like that. No, the Philippines is a highly Catholic nation, no? So our surrogates should listen to us.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Lau. Well, now let's open the floor to a discussion. So you may exchange your arguments and rebut each other's ideas. But I'd also like to throw in, while we're at this question of gender equality, the new law on violence against women and their children, where men have also been prosecuted for cheating on their wives, for as a type of psychological abuse. So can anyone start the arguments here? You have posed questions to Attorney Norbe about international law, but also whether we should just make the laws equal rather than decriminalizing infidelity.
Okay, who wants to go first?
Maybe I'd like to ask a question.
Okay.
Because you focused on, for example, adultery, concubinage, but as Attorney Karen said, that we also have the vowsy. Are you saying as well that because we married women can also use it against the spouse, no? For example, infidelity, no? Under psychological violence, are you also saying that we decriminalize this? So vowsy, in respect to that, should also be repealed?
No, because there is actually jurisprudence, XXX versus People, GR number 252739, decided in 2024, which states that marital infidelity per se should not be decriminalized, because this is not really a psychological violence, but only the effect of this marital infidelity. And therefore, it should not be equated with marital infidelity, should not be equated with psychological violence. So that is very clear. Even in the ponencia of Justice Hernando, he posed the question, so does this mean that every extramarital relationship rises to the level of marital infidelity? he said that the answer is no. And this is further supported by the dissenting opinion of Justice Leonen, Justice Cagiwa, and Justice Mario Lopez, where they stated that marital infidelity per se should not be decriminalized. Because number one, there really is no clear definition of marital infidelity, and you cannot equate psychological violence under VAUSI with adultery and concubinage under Articles 333 and 334 of the Revised Penal Code. So that's for the VAUSI issue. So for the international law issue, we are actually bound by our commitment on the CEDAW because we ratified it. Therefore, we are bound to uphold this principle. And under CEDAW, we have to repeal all penal laws which are discriminatory against women. That's why in Magna Carta, especially in Section 15 of its IRR, we already made a commitment that we have to repeal Articles 333 and 334 of the Revised Penal Code. So this is not just a matter of us being a Catholic nation. We are bound by our commitment to the international community, especially if these international treaties have found its way to our domestic laws, such as the Magna Carta for Women and its IRR. In fact, the Philippine Commission on Women has recommended the repeal of the Revised Penal Code provisions on adultery and concubinage, and that's why, as previously mentioned in my opening statement, 2 House bills were filed in order to decriminalize adultery and concubinage by repealing Articles 333 and 334 of the Revised Penal Code. So as to equalization, this was also the position of the Commission on Human Rights in response to the bill in their position paper that they drafted. However, gender is only one aspect of this issue. As will be discussed further in another subtopic, there are many facets of this debate, and it should not be confined to gender only.
Yes, now I get it.
Yeah.
Yes, you're saying, what is that? Equalization, right? So that's why I found it odd, I found it odd that there would be something like that, because what this CEDAW is saying is that we should do away with laws that are disadvantageous to women, that are unfair to women. So that's actually different from asking for decriminalization. Are you saying that if we make it fairer to women, for example, then we would not be in violation of CEDAW, right? That's number one. And number two, the authorities you cited seem to support the position that we should not decriminalize infidelity. In fact, we have that's why we have VAUSI, because these women, we have vulnerable sectors, equality under the Constitution. According to the Supreme Court in Serrano versus Gallant Maritime, calls for attention because there are vulnerable sectors, such as women, and we have to admit that in the Philippines, the men take advantage of their position in society and therefore inflict violence against women, and the women are the receiving end of the impact of infidelity, with men spreading themselves too thin, and and then of course this trickles down to the children. So that's my position. What is so wrong with the status quo that you want it decriminalized? Isn't this a weapon for vulnerable sectors such as women? You want civil? Is that what we're saying? I mean, as a lawyer, you know that civil is not as potent. These women need leverage, and this is how they get it. For support, how many years is a civil case? Criminal is the way to go. I mean, we need this. We need this as teeth to the law, because when the Constitution says that we should protect the foundation of family, and that is marriage, to protect our values, we must marshal all the arsenal of the state, and the most potent of which is criminal law, and I don't think we should do away with it.
Do we have stats here, like how many women on average get prosecuted under our adultery laws vis-a-vis men being prosecuted under concubinage / VAUSI laws? Out of curiosity.
Well, there was in the policy brief prepared by the Philippine Commission on Women, there was no official statistics, but they stated that adultery suits are used as bargaining chip for women to cooperate in a nullity petition. Mm-hmm. So that is actually more harmful to women because adultery is easier to prove. So if we're talking about bargaining chip, it really is the women who are at the receiving end. It's not men. So if you will continue to criminalize adultery and concubinage and maintain the unequal provisions with adultery being easier to prove and more grave penalties, then women will be put in a more in a more losing end than men.
Partner, I just want to ask both of them. How about the proposal that to make it gender neutral? Because a lot of the arguments against this or for this is the fact that it is anti-women. So for gender neutrality, let's just call it assuming sexual infidelity. And it should be in the civil courts and not in criminal courts.
So it is decriminalizing
It is
sexual
decriminalizing,
infidelity, but
yes.
making it gender neutral.
Yes. So what, gentlemen?
Well,
just very
actually,
briefly.
that's a good point because in light of Pride Month, we're still in Pride
Yes,
Month.
yes.
It is a remedy that is lacking for same-sex couples because no one can sue the other for infidelity, even if technically they consider themselves in a marriage, because
yes.
they are not covered by that law. Because it's very clear in our provisions, adultery applies only to women, cheating on their husbands, and concubinage for all those more difficult circumstances. It has to be a mistress, but it's still a man against a woman. Well, vowsy have to be married para maging
applicable.
Yes, actually, for you to have a cause of action. That means then it can't apply to same-sex couples. So what do you guys think about that?
That's a possible solution because apart from decriminalizing marital infidelity, it also makes it gender neutral, which is more fair to both parties.
But we can also, if I may, make it gender neutral without decriminalizing it. We just adjust adultery. Because you said that the men are taking advantage of it because of how it's framed right now. But the solution is not decriminalizing, but really amending the adultery portion. Because as it stands as well, the women are also, if you say that it's available to men, it's also available to women. If there's infidelity, then they can also go to court. The thing is, why do we, I haven't really, with all due respect, heard from you why we should change the status quo. It's not working. By saying that is, I haven't heard from you the reason for changing the status quo, meaning decriminalizing it. I have heard from you changing the status quo to make it fairer, which is different from totally decriminalizing it. Why do you think that we need to make it not marshal anymore the criminal arsenal of the state and just make it, and simply make it civil?
Okay. So I guess we've already started to talk about the remedies, partner. No? Medyo pinag-uusapan na natin yan. Kaya nga, kung hindi nga ang criminal law or penal law, well, as a backgrounder, alam naman po natin, tayong mga abogado, na ang penal law ay since 1932 pa yata yan, no? So matagal.
And this was passed, the adultery law was passed when the time when Congress was consisted of all men. So it was really
may konting,
passed with a certain perspective of men trying to punish their cheating wives.
Exactly. In fact, if I may, just to interject, di ba? Even, di ba, sa criminal law, if the man catches the wife committing adultery in the conjugal dwelling and he kills the wife, pag pinatay niya ang asawa niya, pero wag niyo pong gawin yun, ha? Sinasabi ko lang, yun po ang nakalagay sa batas at mga kaso na decide na ating mga korte, na Supreme Court. Pero pag pinatay mo yung asawa mo,
and the paramour,
ang penalty mo lang ay distyero. Alam mo, ang distyero, hindi ka ikukulong. Huwag ka lang lumapit with a certain number of kilometers, di ba? Distance.
There's certain radius.
Correct, certain radius. And the funny thing is, it's actually to protect the man.
I was about to
from
say
revenge,
that.
Di ba?
From the revenge and reprisal from the...
Napansin ko yung mga cameraman natin, nakikinig talaga.
Yung isang camera natin, dito, nakasmile na.
Exactly. But just to show you well, we have to admit, the time these laws were crafted, this was really pro-men, as you correctly put out.
Almost 100 years ago.
Exactly.
So it is maybe outdated as stated by Attorney Al. So let's see. Kung hindi nga criminal law ang answer, Attorney Al, what's your argument for changing this to civil liability?
First, I have to emphasize that adultery and concubinage are private crimes because the parties directly affected are the family unit, mainly the spouses. This is not like murder, robbery, or rape, where the state is affected at large. This is the reason why a complaint for adultery and concubinage can only be filed by the offended spouse. It cannot be filed by the state. Based on that premise, civil remedies are adequate. What are these remedies? Like for instance, we have annulment of marriage on the ground of psychological incapacity under Article 36 of the Family Code and legal separation under Article 55 of the Family Code on the ground of sexual infidelity or perversion. We also have action for damages under Articles 19 to 21 of the Civil Code. Civil remedies are already adequate because the nature of civil remedies, it is aimed at reconciliation between the family. So if you want to protect a marriage, what is the best way to do that? Is it to send a spouse to prison? Will that mend a broken marriage? What actually happens is that it's going to destroy the marriage because now there is no more opportunity for reconciliation because there was already a stigma associated with the spouse who was imprisoned. And if this will be seen by the children, then it closes the door for any reconciliation. But if it's just civil case, a civil liability, then families might, for example, might still have a chance on reconciliation and fixing their marriage. And I also want to bring out or to discuss a point on deterrence. It has always been the argument that criminalizing something deters it. However, there is no empirical evidence that supports this proposition. On the contrary, an article published in the Fordham International Law Journal disclosed that in the United States, adultery is reported to occur in between 10 and 60% of marriages. What does this mean? This means that criminalizing adultery and concubinage failed to deter it.
Okay, and that number is for the Philippines.
For the United States.
For the United States. Okay, interesting.
What was the stat again, partner?
That
adultery is reported to occur in between 10 and 60% of marriages.
10 to
10 to
60%.
60%.
Yeah, 60%, that's really high. More than half of every marriage. Attorney Lau, what is your response to that? Do you think we should still
Well, number one,
continue to make it criminal? Yeah.
thank you, Karen. Well, number one, it's the United States. No, we're different. We're the Philippines. And number two, of course, that is with criminal laws in place. Do we have data as to the level of infidelity without these criminal laws in place? That's my question. So we don't. The thing is, law is just one of the techniques. So I think law alone cannot do it. We have other collective, because when you say law, it's a social technique to achieve social goods. And we're talking about the reinforcement of the family as our social good here. Now, we marshal all the legal techniques: civil, administrative, criminal, private arranging technique, public benefit conferral. But we forget that law is just one of the social techniques, collective efforts. We also have education. So maybe they missed out on education. And what is the message that we're sending our kids, our families, if we cheapen marriage like this, that we allow infidelity to prosper? So this, I think the stats are not enough. And I think I stick with the status quo. It's just that I agree with you completely that we have to make our laws fairer.
Okay. Well, Attorney Lau, now we're opening the floor to 6 more minutes of exchange. Do you think, because you did post that question, have we seen the effects if we decriminalize infidelity? Do you think that decriminalizing it would lead to a rise in cases of infidelity? Parang sa Pilipinas naman, very prevalent na infidelity. I mean, that's why we have this topic. There's been so many headlines about certain people having being accused by their wives of extramarital affairs involving prominent people.
Yes.
There's an active case right now in the media partner that has been getting a lot of the headlines as well. So, meron bang ganung fear, Attorney Lau?
That it's going to rise,
Yes.
right? Well, definitely, rhetoric is so important, and I think the moment that we treat it this way, you know, this moral depravity for us is not serious enough. That's actually the messaging here. We open the floodgates, no, to attacks on our institution, which is marriage, which is so important for us. I just know it because it's the messaging is important, no. So can you imagine we go to, you know, what is our treatment of this? You know, I know that we can still say, no, we still don't like it because we have civil liabilities. We can, maybe take over your house, sell them at public auction for, to recover damages. But really, the messaging it is wrong, and it's risen to that level that it's a public condemnation altogether, rather than it's being a private affair. In fact, the balance to that is, well, you don't want your breadwinner to go to jail. It's your choice because it's your personal choice. That's how we balance it. But the messaging of the state must be very clear. This deserves the full attention of the state, including its greatest weapon, which is criminal law.
Attorney Al. Your response to that?
Criminal law is actually a potent weapon. That's why it should be used carefully, especially in this case where there is no data that criminalizing adultery and concubinage actually deters it. The fact that the cases is prevalent means that criminalizing it failed to prevent or even to curb the incidence of adultery and concubinage. So we are relying on guesswork and speculation in imposing a punitive sanction to people, especially to women who are at the receiving end. We must take note that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or due process or property without due process of law. You are going to deprive someone of liberty based only on speculation, given that there is no data that criminalizing adultery and concubinage actually deters it. So, for that, I would like to pose the question, how does criminalizing marital infidelity discourage people from engaging in it?
Well,
yes. How does it? Messaging is so important, right? And then they think, I ask you, are you not scared to go to jail to do something, right? It's for me, it's the same thing. I'm not gonna murder anybody because, of course, I see the prospect of jail time. It's the same here. It deters me from, I'm a married man, so I can say this. So it deters me absolutely to do these things. And the messaging is very clear to me that this is something I don't want. And I don't want to introduce venereal diseases into the matrimonial bed. I don't want my daughter to feel betrayed seeing my wife break down in frustration, in disappointment. You understand? So for me, we have our values. And as a country, I want this upheld. I want it to remain, that we treat this seriously. It's not just a private thing. It's not a simple contract. It's not just torts will not do for this. It's what is an alienation of affection. No, you committed this and you put at risk the family that you swore to protect. I know that there is, for example, you can ask for separation and all that, but it's a commitment that we take seriously from the start, from the get-go. And we marshal everything. That's why we have seminars to make sure that we're ready. That's civil. That's administrative. You secure the permits. They're civil. Yes, if you do this, we can ask for support. But there is also criminal because the messaging is clear that this moral depravity merits criminal sanction.
But Attorney Chris, is it still something that is a part of a messaging by the Philippines as a country? Because we've had leaders of our own country. Our partner here, Attorney Mike, you were the press secretary for former President Joseph Estrada. And publicly, he had several partners, a legal wife, but also other women that he openly had relationships and children with. So if we're talking about messaging, Attorney Chris, isn't that a bit outdated? Because it seems to me that this is culturally acceptable. We also have a former actor, Senator Revilla, right, the senior, has how many children? I think record-breaking so far of, I don't know, over 50? How many? But that's my point. It's known publicly, but it's also seems to be culturally accepted.
Yes.
So is our laws out of line with reality?
Right. So for me, it's very clear. How do we look at this? Do we like it or not? And then if we are in agreement that we don't like it, because we don't like it, not just because it's more depraved, but because it puts at risk our family, right? You introduce, again, as I said, you spread yourself too thin, the families break up because you swore to love each other, and then suddenly your partner, betrays you, and of course, it's not gonna, you just don't see yourself staying in that relationship. So our families fall apart. So if we are in agreement that we don't like it, it's morally depraved, then my question to you is, how do we preserve the family? Is it enough that we do, because he admits that we need to penalize this, civilly albeit, right? So we are actually in agreement that this is wrong. But I'm raising the stakes. I'm saying, so you agree with me it's wrong, so why don't we go all the way, like max out?
Partner, I want to go into the numbers, or to the metrics, so to speak, to the data. Kasi I guess this question or this comment applies to both of you. Di ba kagaya ng sinasabi natin, the death penalty? Some people are advocating for the death penalty, and some people are saying no. Those who advocate say that putting the death penalty in place will deter crime. But statistics and facts show otherwise. Or what are the latest statistics now? Is the imposition of the death penalty really actually going to deter crime? In a similar fashion, in a similar vein, ang sinasabi natin, kung merong criminal liability ang babae sa lalaki when they commit marital infidelity, ito ba talaga ay deterrent? Did it really deter men and women in our society not to commit this crime or this moral aberration, whatever you call it, no? Kasi kung hindi naman nag-deter, baka naman pwede natin tignan na let's make it fair to both men and women.
Or even
By
the discourse,
decriminalizing.
is it fair to call it a crime?
Exactly.
Right? Because
Oo.
Attorney Al has a point where he says this is a personal matter, like compared to other crimes like theft, murder.
Yes.
There's an offended party and you really want to contain that person from doing
True.
it to other people. But in this case, kung may mga serial killer, ano tawag mo sa serial womanizer?
Serial.
Ano yung mga
I like that.
babae na-
Serial womanizer.
Oo, di ba? So keep him, put him in jail and
That's
keep him
James
away from
Bond.
women. Ganun ba yun?
That's James
Oo.
Bond.
So,
07.
very exciting conversation, but we're gonna have to take a short break. Up next, final thoughts from our guests as they make their last case. You're watching Abogado.
Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Abogado. The question on the table tonight, should marital infidelity be decriminalized in the Philippines? We've heard sharp arguments and passionate reasoning from two outstanding legal luminaries, Attorney Jose Al Norbe Jr. of the Nicolas de Vega law offices advocating for decriminalization, and Attorney Christopher Lau of the Guzman, Dionido, Caga, Jucaban Associates Law Office defending the retention of criminal penalties.
Now we hear the final reflections and closing arguments from both sides, beginning with Attorney Al Norbe.
Marital infidelity should be decriminalized in the Philippines because it violates the Equal Protection Clause. It violates the right to privacy and autonomy of two consenting adults. And this is not a commensurate punishment to the nature of the act because this is merely a private matter between two individuals and therefore it deserves civil penalties. We agree that marriage is an inviolable social institution. However, criminalizing marital infidelity actually destroys the very thing that the state seeks to protect. The state cannot protect the sanctity of marriage and stability of family by resorting to punitive and retributive measures. A husband and a wife filing a complaint for adultery and concubinage against each other is a painful experience not only for them but for their children as well. This would destroy the stability of marriage and family. Filing a case for adultery is not the way around to mend a broken marriage. Every state must determine where to effectively allocate its limited resources. The Philippines is no different. Should the Philippine government use it in policing the bedroom, using laws that patently discriminate against women, unduly punish private acts beyond the long arm of the state, and effectively destroy the stability of family? Or should the Philippine government focus its already limited resources to more serious crimes, which pose direct harm to society? On this note, I rest my case.
Okay, very well said, Attorney Norbe. Attorney Lau.
Well, you said that it's purely private, but actually we also go after the paramours, right? Because when you say adultery, concubinage, we make them parties as well. So it's not really, you're not just running after really your spouse, right? So anyway, my closing remark would be that I'm not convinced. I'm here to listen, and I'm not convinced that we should change the status quo, except that we make it fairer to the women. But the messaging is clear. This is consistent with the Constitution that we should reinforce the family as a social good. And to do that, we have law as one of the social techniques. We have others, education, morality, religion. We have to work on those as well, especially education, because that's something we can do. The Constitution has a separation between church and state. But we have to marshal everything that we have. If we agree that this is something, this is a scourge, this is a problem, if we agree that the reinforcement of the family is a social good, then the state must, marshal all the legal techniques, no, including criminal law, to make sure that it is reinforced. There's a reason why we don't want men, women whoring around, because we have families to protect, children to protect, we have values to protect, we want moral uprightness, and I still believe in that in this world of postmodernism. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, final message on closing argument. No whoring around, okay?
No whoring around.
Don't whore around.
I think that's the quote of the night. Okay.
But now, Attorney Mike, we'll ask our final questions. Do you have a final question, Attorney Mike?
Well, it's not. I guess it's not really a question, but it could be treated as such. But for both of you, like I'm trying to just observe that at the end of the day, the Philippines is quite slow in adjusting to what's going on globally. For example, in the case of divorce, we are, I think, the only country aside from the Vatican that has not recognized divorce, although there are pending bills. In fact, that was one of our topics, partner. And now also in terms of decriminalizing sexual infidelity, concubinage, and adultery, which we all know, and I think we all agree, alam naman natin siguro, talaga medyo imbalance, no? Unfair sa babae. So, ang comment ko na siguro sa tingin niyo ba, why is this? Is it because of the influence of the Catholic Church? That is why it takes so long for us to adjust to what is actually going on around the world in terms of gender equality.
Anyone have an answer
That
to
is
that?
actually a factor, the influence of the church, because in the Asia-Pacific region, only Brunei and the Philippines treat adultery as a crime.
Which Brunei is a Muslim country.
Yes, Brunei is a Muslim country, so we can see the influence of religion in their laws. But the better thing to do here is to actually uphold the principle of separation of church and state, which means secularism, that our laws should be free from the influence of religious teachings, because what happens here is that we prioritize the morality or the religious teaching of the one dominant religion and impose it in all the citizens of the country, even if they do not subscribe to that particular religion.
Yeah.
So it is best to follow international developments such as decriminalizing adultery, because this is actually the next logical step on the path towards gender equality.
Yeah, well, actually, that's a good point, because if you think about it, this can also be raised as a legal question as to the violation of the Equal Protection Clause. But I guess people can argue that it's not comparable. But I'm just saying, for example, if we legalize same-sex marriage, but we don't adjust the way our laws on adultery and concubinage are worded, then technically same-sex couples enjoy a protection that heterosexual couples don't enjoy, right?
That's right.
But my question would be, how do we then harmonize our laws on adultery, concubinage, vowsy, infidelity versus our family code on the inviolability of marriage? Because these are two separate laws, the adultery, concubinage from the 1930s, the family code from the 1980s, but our laws that are allowing annulment only have one ground, which is psychological incapacity. So, marital
36.
infidelity is not a ground for annulment, and yet, if you file a criminal case against your spouse, you're putting the other spouse in jail, and yet you're still required to be married to that person who put you in prison. So how do we reconcile those
That is
two?
so
That's a
true.
very good point.
Very, very difficult, because, for example, we are in agreement, or maybe not, I don't know. But based on the discussion, we are in agreement that this is something that should be penalized, whatever the form is, right? So infidelity should be penalized, no? But with respect to, for example, ending marriage, which is consensual, it's a different thing, no? We're not in agreement whether we should have divorce, because it's just so different from infidelity. In infidelity, we are in agreement that it's wrong. But in consensual termination of the marriage, we're not in agreement, right?
But our laws don't allow it. It doesn't allow consensual termination.
Yes, that's
of the
why.
marriage,
That's why for me,
right?
these two things are different. You can be for maintaining the status quo for infidelity, but also for divorce, something like that, because they're different. But harmonization, as you said, is going to be tricky for us because of all of these things. I don't have the answer to that.
Well, I guess that was partner. That was again another. Well, when we have two distinguished guests, legal luminaries, that definitely it's inevitable that we have thought-provoking exchanges. So, partner, what resonated more with you tonight?
I think the reality that perhaps what we have in our laws decriminalizing is an option we should look into, because if our intention is deterrence, it has not deterred the infidelity in society in the Philippines. In fact, we've seen that it has become accepted, as I mentioned, a prominent former president, but also like we've seen the effects. I can think of publicly, Maggie Wilson has not been able to come back to the Philippines because of an adultery case that has been filed against her and her alleged boyfriend. But recently in the news also, partner, lumabas sa bilyonaryo to si Albi Benitez and Ivana Alawi. But Ivana recently took a lie detector test denying that she's a homewrecker. So, it is something that I think is very relevant, but whether we use criminal laws to deter it or just civil liability is another question, which
Correct.
I think should be still open to discussion.
Exactly.
Okay. Parang ikaw speechless, ha? Parang napansin ko with this topic, tahimik ka, partner.
Hindi naman. I said my piece.
Okay, takot na takot ka yata. Okay.
Okay.
We thank Attorney Jose Al Norbe Jr. of Nicolas and Vega law offices and Attorney Christopher John Lau of the Guzman, Dionido, Caga, Jucaban, and Associates Law Office for going head-to-head in tonight's discussion.
Well, indeed, this legal face-off showed us that when the country's sharpest minds meet in a respectful discussion, passionate at that, we gain more answers. We gain perspective. The battle may be legal, but the impact is deeply human.
That's the mission of Abogado, to elevate public discourse, confront difficult questions, and showcase the power of principled advocacy.
This is Abogado.
Good night.